You're listening to Widowed AF with
Rosie Gilmoss
and Lucinda Boast.
We've invited some members of the world's most exclusive club to bravely share their stories.
Join us for some honest conversations about living a different life, the crushing lows, the surprising highs, and everything in between.
Please note this is a podcast about death. Carefully read the episode descriptions and be kind to yourself.
But for now, welcome to our podcast.
Let's begin.
Hello, welcome back to Widowed AF. Rosie and I are joined this morning by Antony Parks. Hi, Auntie.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
We're really good, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to see what you can get out of me.
We're excited for that too. So, Antony, tell us about your husband, Andrew. How did you meet? Tell us a little bit about him.
So we met back in January 2012. It was one of those real kind of classic. I wasn't looking for a relationship. I was very happy in my single life. And I guess when you know, don't you? You know, I met him and, things just naturally went that way. And despite the fact that I was actively trying to push him away, wouldn't they? So I met in 2012. We had an amazing life together. We did lots of really exciting things that I never thought that I would do. Moved to London for 3 years, and got married in 2016. When he proposed in 2015, because I told him he had to, basically. But to be fair to him, he did it properly. We went to Paris and went up to Eiffel Tower, so it was all lovely and romantic. So got married February 2016, and sadly he lost his battle with his mental health issues in September 2019.
So you've mentioned mental health issues,
yeah.
And Andrew did die from suicide, didn't he?
Correct.
I can feel all the hairs on me standing up, even just saying that word out loud. It is such an emotive word, and I think it is something that all of us live in fear of happening to the people that we love. Are you able to tell us what happened and ultimately, what led to his death?
Yeah, so if I'm being completely open, he had mental health issues his whole life, sorry. And I was very aware of that. Within even the first, I think, 6 months of us meeting, he took an overdose.
Wow.
So I was very aware going into the relationship that this was an issue. I think there's no other word for it really.
No.
And we'd gone through over the years many things, many attempts on his life really. He at one point got sectioned because it was recognised that he was a danger to himself really. But he was trying. He wasn't one of the people who swept it under the carpet. He went to every therapist going. He took every medication going. He tried everything that he could. He wanted to get better. He was aware that there was a problem, but for whatever reason, nobody could ever get to where the issue was. And so ultimately, September 2019, I was away with work, and I had a phone conversation with him, literally at midnight, talking about the fact that I was coming home the next day, what we were going to do at the weekend. We were stupid things. He'd started work on the garden, and we were talking about how many bags of chippings we were going to have to get from B&Q to cover the area that we wanted to do. That was what we planned to do when I got home. And when I phoned him the next morning, he didn't answer the phone. And you just know, my gut, everything within me, I knew what had happened. I didn't know the detail of what had happened, but I was very aware that I knew what I was going to come home to, and I knew what I was going to find.
That must just be so terrifying. And I guess throughout your whole relationship, you lived with that fear that it may happen one day. Was he diagnosed with mental health condition, or it was depression, or was there something more severe going on?
Yeah, so depression, anxiety, epilepsy as well, randomly.
Okay.
So it was one of those things. There was always something. There was always
Yeah.
something happening. There was always some problem. So yeah, like I said, he was very aware of it, and was still actively, even that year he'd been to another therapist, again to try and get to the underlying cause, but yeah, just couldn't work out what it was.
You can hear as you describe him how hard he fought to beat this thing, this all-encompassing, snake of depression. Lou and I talk quite openly about mental health issues because I don't think there's many of us that haven't got some collateral damage. And I suffer from, hits of depression, and I'm like you, like Andrew. I have therapy, and I'm kind of open to trying lots of things. My depression is a trauma-based depression, so I can fix it. It can be cured if that's the right word. But this kind of insipid, life-sucking depression, you can't imagine living with that all the time, and it must have been exhausting both for him and, of course, for you.
Yeah, it was one of those things that, obviously I reflect back on it, and actually, I've been to therapy myself afterwards. When you've gone through something like that, I think I almost think you have to. And yeah, it was, I'd almost normalised it. It had become such a normal, everyday thing for us and our life that it wasn't until he'd gone that I reflected on how exhausting it was for me.
Yeah.
And how difficult it was for me, because I don't know, through stubbornness or whatever you want to call it, I just powered through and I just got on with it. And I just, this was the man that I loved. And so I was willing to do whatever I needed to do. I didn't, need anyone to thank me for it or ask me to do it. It was just what you did.
I'm hearing actually sort of similarities in this to being, I used the term cancer adjacent before, to supporting somebody through a terminal illness, because you're living under this shadow, but you kind of just get on with it. And the love that you had, and I imagine still have, for Andrew, is tangible. I can feel it. Can I ask you the question? And again, I there is no obligation to answer this if you don't wish to, but could I ask you how and who found him?
So he hung himself, and it was me that found him. Just because I think, even now looking back on it and talking it out, it's so ridiculous. But like I said, I was working away, so I was in Glasgow and Edinburgh at the time. And even though I knew first thing what had happened, and I say that as in I felt it, I was like, well, I can't do anything about it now. I'm literally the other side of the country. I live in Birmingham, just for context. And so I just went through that day as normal. I did my normal work. I carried on doing what I needed to do, because I was also very aware that I couldn't do anything. There was no point phoning anyone else to go to the house. There's no point, and I think ultimately there was no point putting anyone else through that. It was, I don't know, maybe my responsibility almost to go and find him. And obviously when I did, I was still horrified and shocked and all of those things. But I even remember that taxi journey back from the train station, and I'd already in my head started going, okay, well, what do I do? Who do I phone? What is the process for such a thing? Because it was, I knew what I was coming home to.
So you've kind of almost gone into autopilot, haven't you?
Absolutely.
And that sort of, I've got to work. I've got to get through this work. It harks back to things we talked about with Jess in last week's episode, and it was things about how she ended up making tea for the police officers, and I went into kind of, I've got a bra, and your brain does some very peculiar things to protect you from what you're about to experience. I cannot imagine walking into my home and finding the person that I loved dead by their own hand. The fact that you are able to speak so eloquently, I think I'm blown away and humbled by the fact that you've come to share this with us, because it is a story and an insight that most of us, fortunately, will never experience. And it is something that we absolutely have to talk about, because this is happening, and it's happening more, and men seem to be particularly vulnerable. I'm a mother. I have two young boys, and it is a fear that haunts us. And of course, the more it retreats into the silence and the shame and the darkness.
Yeah.
So, and I know that for many suicide widows, sorry to use that term, they dislike the term committed suicide. Do you have any feelings either way on that?
No, I mean, they're just words to me.
Yeah.
You know, ultimately, you know, I believe, you know, I did some research around it myself as to understand why that is. I believe it goes back to the idea that it used to be a criminal offence.
Yeah.
And so you're not committing it. It's, you know, but yeah, for me personally, it's, yeah, they're just words.
Yeah.
The act is the same.
So, Antony, what happens next? You walk into your home, you find Andrew, and he's dead. What do you do next? What's the next step for you?
So I went out the house. I was like, I don't need to be here. I don't need to see this kind of thing. And so I phoned the ambulance service. They, God, even now, I look back on it, they wanted me to go in and take him down. And I was just, even in that moment, I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Like, that's not, even now, I can't believe, and I don't know, maybe it's a script, maybe it's part of what they have to do, but I was like, absolutely not, I'm sorry, but I'm not doing that. So from that point, it was really just that kind of practical, you know, that police turned up, ambulance turned up. So, you know, you've got, you know, this relatively quiet little place in Birmingham that suddenly swarmed with, I think there was 3 police cars, 2 ambulances. You know, I'm very aware that all the neighbours twitching the curtains. And, you know, like I said, I wasn't in the house at this point, so they took me into an ambulance, and it was just the most bizarre series of events then that happened. You know, it was almost like I was being questioned. You know, and you know, again, I suppose I get it in that they have a process to go through, but you know, I felt I was being accused, and then, you know, we had that bizarre thing where the paramedic comes out and tells me what's, you know, that Angie's passed away, and I'm like, well, I know, I phoned you to tell you that, like, you know, this is not new information. And you know, I was told at that point that I couldn't go back into the house because, you know, I guess for all intents and purposes, it was a potential crime scene. You know, so I was ushered off to a hotel, and you know, at this point, I'd got friends and family with me, thankfully. But the thing that really sticks out in my mind of that period, and I would say actually probably for a good week afterwards, actually, is the complete lack of information support. I literally was, I remember really clearly, I was sat in the ambulance, and there was a police officer, you know, she was lovely, this isn't her fault, just for the record. And she gives me a leaflet. It says, oh, in here, there's some information about what happens when somebody dies suddenly. I've got to tell you, though, most of it's not relevant to you because it's different when it's suicide.
Useful then, yeah?
Yeah. And I'm like, okay, so you know that this is, you know that this isn't good for me. You know that you're missing something, that you need something for this situation, and you don't have it. And then I got, so I don't know if you're aware or listeners are aware, but when someone takes their own life, it's referred to a coroner, and you have to go through an inquest process. I get told, okay, so the coroner will phone you tomorrow to talk you through what happens and what next steps. I didn't hear from them for about a week, to the point that I didn't even know where they'd taken Andrew, you know, because I wasn't at the house. Like I said, I'd been carted off to a hospital. I got a phone call to say that they had taken his body, but didn't know where. And, you know, I'm phoning coroner, I'm trying to understand what's happening. They're treating me like I'm stupid, like I'm supposed to know this process, because, you know, to them it's just an everyday thing. But I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on.
I went through similar and
Yeah,
with the coroner, and what you say about having to make those phone calls and then them treating you like you should already know. I found myself saying, sorry, I'm just in a bit of shock here and I don't really understand.
yeah.
I kept saying sorry and useless.
Yeah, and I think the thing for me as well was that I was then getting it from friends and family. That they thought I was being the obstructive one, that I wasn't telling them information. And it's, again, I was just like, I can't tell you something that I don't know. It was, it's for something that, and unfortunately, as you said, Rosie, for something that happens quite regularly, it's an appalling process that is not set up to help or support you in any way, shape or form.
And is this something that other suicide widows have experienced, that the leaflets, it's not designed for you? And I mean, I found also a lack of information. Ben had been missing hours before anybody even thought to ring me. I mean, I don't blame any individual, but surely there needs to be a better system for helping people who've suddenly lost somebody. It just doesn't seem geared up to help us. And I'm going to ask this question. We may cut it out if it's not appropriate. But do you feel that you were treated any differently because you were in a same-sex marriage?
Not necessarily at that time, but definitely at periods and things. I would be phoning places, and there was still, I would say my husband's passed away, and you almost heard the silence on the other end of the line when they tried to process what that meant. What? 2 men? Sorry, a husband? What? There was definitely, and actually, even when reading literature and looking things up and all of that stuff, everything is designed for same-sex couples. Everything is man and wife. Everything is that kind of thing. It was, and even. I remember even talking to the funeral director, and I don't think the funeral director had ever dealt with a same-sex marriage.
Oh.
But I suppose I'd also have to be realistic in that, from a numbers perspective, there's probably isn't that many.
No, I was looking
same-sex widows.
I was just, doing my research, like the good little podcast host I am, and gay marriage was only legalised in the UK in 2013. So you were married in 16, so that's 3 years since gay marriage was legalised. So you must really be you must be in very much a minority. I mean, some might say you're an early adopter of being a gay widow. And I also didn't realise until I checked on the government website that they in order to be termed, I guess, legally as a widow, you have to be married. Civil partnerships don't constitute a widow. Within widowed AF, we very much include anybody who's in a relationship who loses their partners as a widow. But I guess for things like, being able to tick the widow box on a form, the fact that you are married, I mean, sometimes you struggle with the identity of widow, but in able to claim it, you have to be married. Did that give you any sort of comfort, or did it not really matter?
At the time it didn't, because I was married. One thing that has really struck me from talking to other people, and particularly other same-sex people, is the barriers that you come across if you don't have that piece of paper. If you could have been together 50 years, but actually, in the eyes of the law, unless you've gone through that ceremony and you have that little piece of paper, your relationship for a lot of people is worthless. And that to me is utterly bonkers. Yeah,
it makes no sense. So the law has recently changed. I think it was possibly even last week, about enabling non-married parents, the remaining parent, to access a little bit of extra funding. But my God, how archaic that it's 23 and they've just changed that.
Yeah. No, and that's the point, isn't it? How ridiculous that we have to have these conversations.
Yeah.
To say that you've got to go through all of that added trauma.
Yeah.
To validate your relationship. It's just utterly ridiculous to me.
That's good. I like that. Validate your relationship. That's a nice. I like the way you phrase that. What support did you have? You've spoken about having friends and family with you at the time itself.
Yeah.
if you wouldn't mind just talking us through sort of what, support networks. I know that you're a member of, I think you affectionately refer to it as Suicide Squad, don't you? Which is not the way.
I'm in that one too.
It's because it's suicide and death by their own hand, isn't it? So it kind of refers to deaths like John's as well. So presumably you reached out and found your people within that group. But what about sort of support closer to home? Did you get what you needed?
I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I've been through the ringer a little bit with that. So initially, I think things were really good. So just for the purpose of clarity, I have a very, very difficult relationship with my family. For not necessarily related to sexuality, but just lots and lots of things over the years that have just built up. And initially, actually everyone was there for me. I had friends drive up from London, from Bristol, local friends, Andrew's mom, my mom, and for those first few days, and it literally was days. It was all-encompassing protection bubble. And then very, very quickly, things changed. Very, very quickly. Not with my friends, I have to say. My friends are the most incredible group of people. And I am so, so, so grateful for them. They'll be listening to this, so they like that.
And a big shout out to Antony's friends, like supportive friends here.
I would not have got through this without them. I'm not going to name individual people in case I forget anyone. So
very wise.
But yeah, but very quickly, certainly from my side of the family, it became what can we get out of this? What and we me and Andrew weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but we had a comfortable life, good life, nice house, car, holidays. And yeah, very quickly it was again, I won't name names who, but it was, oh well, can we have Andrew's car? You don't drive, so and this is literally within a week.
Wow.
And there was, well, and so I understandably, I think in circumstances, very quickly decided that I was going to move out of the house. I didn't want to live there and relive that kind of every day. And it was, well, if it's empty while you're selling it, how about I move in? And I'm just like, what? Sorry?
I suspect it wouldn't have been so easy to get them back out again either.
Well, no. And, it's just that thing of, like I said, this was literally within a week. We hadn't even got a date for a funeral. And already the vultures are circling. And it just became a real... It goes without saying that I don't speak to them now either. Just because it was almost a, how can we exploit this? How can we... And the unfortunate reality is that I have spoken to many, many, many people who have experienced very similar things.
Sadly, so have we.
Yeah, the people seem to think that there's money to be made from death, and that's... I will never understand how that can be your first thought, how your mind can go to that straight away.
Money does very strange things to people, doesn't it? We sadly, it is a common theme that we've heard, and the way people react to money. I sold. We had a discovery on finance. I didn't know how much this thing was on finance, and it, of course, because I didn't have a death certificate, these payments had to be paid, and I think it was. I won't say the amount, but it was a lot of money to find every month. And so I put it up for sale. Somebody contacted me and said, well, at least you've got that money from the car. And I said, you're joking, that's paying the finance off. Like, there isn't even enough to pay the whole thing off. And people just have a very peculiar idea of how and even those people who have been left with life insurance, substantial life insurance, it doesn't fill the hole that has been left. And let's be honest, like, there's a huge amount of expenses around death as well. It's...
I was actually going to say, I remember my dad told me the other day that the morning after John died, his father approached my dad and said, John's tools in the garage are really valuable. So when you can you ship them up to me, please? My dad's only just told me that. And in addition to that, we had our business, and I had to obviously make the employees redundant. And one of them tried to sue me for unfair dismissal. Like, I've not even buried the man yet. I'm trying to pay for his funeral, you know?
So can I ask you whether you have dated since, whether you've had any new relationships, whether you're frightened?
I've tried. I think even really early on, I was, in my head, I was like, look, I'm 36. Andrew's life's ended, but mine hasn't.
Yeah.
And that was very, very quickly for me. I was like, actually, I'm young enough, I suppose,
You're a baby.
Yeah, to have another go, I suppose. But I found it is so incredibly difficult from both sides, actually. I think when, as you can probably tell, I'm very open about Andrew and what happened and those circumstances, and some people find that very difficult to deal with. But also, I guess, I don't, am I ready to put myself through that again? I've been hurt in the most unimaginable way. That do I want that again? I don't know. And so I've tried. I guess I'm open to the idea, but it's not a priority. I don't think.
I'm exactly the same.
Never say never.
Absolutely, you've got to be open to it. But I feel exactly the same. When we've lost our partners in kind of shocking and difficult circumstances that leave us with trauma, and to carry that into a new relationship is hard, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, I'm quite pragmatic about it, and I kind of go, well, if it was the other way around, would I want to date me? Probably not, if I'm honest. No.
Don't sell yourself short.
No. But I do hear you, and I think it does take a very special person to date a widow, and they need to be pretty bloody special for us to let them in. And actually, you've got to be in the right place to be in a relationship, because otherwise, yeah, you're right, you're just going to be frightened and waiting for that hammer to drop all the time. Oh, actually, I don't want you to go. I want to keep talking to you. I've really enjoyed this chat, and you've kind of blown me away, really, with how. I really don't want to use the word resilient because it's such an overused word, but your resilience and your love for Andrew
that
kind of
really
shines out to you.
Yeah, it does. You click
And
such a lovely bond.
And the fact that you have very clearly made a choice that you are still here, and that you are still going to live a life. And I mean, what does life look like for you now? You've said that you've moved house.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I almost feel guilty sometimes, because actually, if I'm honest, life is good for me.
Yeah.
I have, like I said, I have amazing friends. I have an incredible job. I have, I do feel guilt, but equally, yeah, I love my life. And, that's not to say that I wouldn't give absolutely everything that I have 10 times over to have Andrew back. But you have to make the best of a bad situation, don't you? And, I can't just sit in a dark room and cry myself to sleep every night. But don't get me wrong, I still do sometimes, but I can't do that all the time. I have to get on with things, and I have to put myself back out there again, because, like you say, I'm still here, and I have to live my life the best way that I can, and actually the way that I'm sure that Andrew would have wanted me to, because I'm sure that he wouldn't want me to just curl up in a corner.
What the listeners can't see is Lulu and I nodding our heads furiously throughout.
I'm welling up.
Yeah, that is exactly kind of where we sit, is that the love hasn't died, but they have. And the bargaining, the screaming at the moon, none of it is going to bring them back.
Yeah.
And so, you will have the choice to either give up and metaphorically die with them and curl up, or you try and you claw your way back out of that pit, and you grab onto every opportunity that life gives you. And it sounds to me like that is exactly what you are doing. And I hope that you are immensely proud of yourself for not only for coming and talking to us here today, which is extremely brave. And I think that I'm basically your number one fan now, but also by honouring Andrew in the way that you have chosen to live your life, which is it's something to behold. So well done, and thank you for talking to us today.
No, thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, honestly.
Thank you for listening today. We'll be back with you soon for more from the front line of loss.
But for now, as you were.